The little homeless girl thought the heat was making her hallucinate, until she realized it WSN single quotes there. In the middle of a 140 degrees Fahrenheit empty highway, a police officer sat tied to a wooden pole, his head hanging, his skin blistering under the deadly sun. And at his feet were two K9 German shepherds, lying motionless on the melting asphalt. Their paws burned, their tongues dry, their bodies minutes away from shutting down forever. No one else was out there. Just her, a barefoot 12-year-old with a half-empty bottle of warm water, staring at three dying lives. Riley froze. Then one of the dogs twitched, just barely, and let out a broken, desperate whine. She dropped to her knees, screaming, "Somebody help! Please!" But no one was coming. What she did next, what a homeless child did alone in that deadly heat, would shock the entire police force. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Most people passed right by her without ever realizing she existed. To them, she was just another barefoot kid wandering the edges of town, a blur in their busy lives, a shadow slipping between alleyways and abandoned buildings. But to 12-year-old Riley, invisibility wasn't a curse. It was survival. She had learned early that when no one paid attention to you, no one bothered you, no one asked questions, and no one tried to take anything from you, not your backpack, not your food, not the tiny scrap of safety you managed to hold on to. Riley had been on her own long enough to understand the rhythm of the streets. But on that particular day, none of her usual hiding spots helped. The sun beat down with an anger she had never felt before, an unrelenting, suffocating heat that scorched the pavement and burned through the soles of her worn-out feet. Still, she pressed forward, clutching her half-empty water bottle like it was treasure. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't even looking for help. She was simply searching for a patch of shade, a little relief, a quiet place where she could breathe for a moment. But Riley had something most people around her lacked, a heart that refused to turn cold, no matter how harsh her life had become. Even when she was exhausted, overheated, and hungry, she always kept her eyes open, not for herself, but for anyone or anything that might need help. Stray dogs, injured birds, even strangers who looked sad. She couldn't just walk away. And that instinct, soft, stubborn, and impossible to silence, was the reason she saw something no one else did. Something that would change everything. The heat that day didn't feel human. It felt alive, like a giant hand pressing down on the world, flattening everything beneath it. The news stations had warned everyone to stay indoors, to avoid the streets, to drink water constantly. But Riley didn't have a home with air conditioning, or a kitchen with cold drinks, or even a fan that worked. All she had was a tattered backpack, a bottle of warm water, and a determination to keep moving before the sun cooked the pavement beneath her feet. Cars sat abandoned in driveways, their metal too hot to touch. Every window in town was closed, curtains drawn tight. It was the kind of heat that made asphalt ripple and mirages dance on the road like waves. Riley wiped sweat from her forehead, her movements slow and exhausted, each step heavier than the last. She'd survived tough days before, cold winters, lonely nights, empty stomachs, but this heat was different. This heat felt dangerous. It pressed against her skin like fire, turning her breath into something thick and suffocating. Her throat burned with thirst, even though she forced herself to drink tiny sips to make the water last. She walked along the edge of the quiet road, staring ahead at the shimmering horizon. Nothing moved, nothing lived. Nothing dared to exist in that kind of temperature. Riley hugged her backpack closer as she searched desperately for shade. But even the trees seemed too tired to protect her. Their leaves drooped, their shadows thin and weak. The world around her looked abandoned, silent, still, and frighteningly empty. Then through the wavering waves of heat rising from the road, she saw something. A shape, A dark silhouette slumped in the middle of the street. Riley blinked, squinting hard. Maybe it was a mirage. Maybe the heat was playing tricks on her tired mind. But as she stepped forward, her heart picked up speed, because the shape wasn't shrinking or disappearing. It was real. And it wasn't alone. Riley slowed to a stop, her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she stared down the empty stretch of road. The heat distorted everything, making the world look like it was melting, but the shadowy figure ahead didn't blur or fade like a normal mirage. It stayed still, solid, real. She wiped her eyes, thinking maybe sweat was blurring her vision, but no. The shape was still there, and it looked human. A sharp jolt of fear raced through her. People didn't lie in the middle of roads, not willingly, not on a day like this. She took a cautious step forward, then another, shielding her eyes with her hand. As she drew closer, the outline sharpened into something unmistakable. A man sitting upright, slumped forward, tied to something, a pole, a post. She couldn't tell yet. Riley's stomach twisted. "Hello?" She called out, her voice barely carrying in the scorching air. No answer. The figure didn't move. Not even a twitch. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around and run, to protect herself, to go somewhere cooler and safe. But Riley had never been the kind of kid who could walk away from someone in danger. Even now, trembling under the brutal sun, she felt her feet inching forward. With each step, more details came into focus. The dark uniform, the glint of a badge, the rope binding his chest, and then something else. Two shapes lying on either side of him. Dogs, big ones, unmoving. Riley's breath caught. Her pulse raced faster. Something was terribly wrong. She tightened her grip on her water bottle, swallowed hard, and whispered to herself, "Don't be scared. Just go." And then she broke into a shaky run toward the danger, toward the heat, toward the unknown, because someone needed help. As Riley drew closer, the heat waves finally stopped blurring the scene, and the truth hit her like a punch to the chest. The man wasn't just slumped against a pole, he was tied to it. Thick rope wrapped around his chest and arms, digging into his uniform so tightly that his skin looked swollen beneath it. His head hung forward, a streak of dried blood running down his temple. Riley's heart lurched. "Sir?" she whispered, stepping closer. No response. Not a sound, not a breath she could see. Then her eyes shifted downward and she froze. Two large German shepherds lay on the scorching pavement beside him, their K9 vests half buried in dust. Their bodies rose and fell with the weakest, shallowest breaths Riley had ever seen. One dog's paw twitched, barely more than a spasm. The other didn't move at all. Their tongues hung limply from their mouths, dry and cracked from the heat. They looked like they were slipping away right in front of her. "No. No, no, no," Riley whimpered, dropping to her knees despite the burning asphalt searing her skin. The faint warmth of a struggling breath hit her palm. "You're alive," she whispered, voice cracking. She turned her attention to the officer. His badge glinted weakly in the sun, the name unreadable through the glare. His lips were pale, dry, cracked open. Riley touched his shoulder gently. "Sir, can you hear me?" She didn't expect a response, and she didn't get one. But she did notice something else. His wrists were tied behind the pole. Ropes knotted so tightly they had cut into his skin. Someone had done this. Someone had left them all here to bake under the deadliest sun of the year. The realization sent a cold shiver through her overheated body. They weren't just victims of the heat. They had been abandoned to die. Riley's breath shook. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. And she was the only one who had found them. Riley's breath came in short, panicked bursts as she scrambled back to her feet. The officer's head remained motionless, his skin blazing red from the unforgiving sun. The K9 South beside him whimpered weakly, barely alive. The sight alone made her heart slam against her ribs. She had seen pain before. She had seen suffering, But never anything like this. Never something so cruel. Her hand shook violently as she tugged at the ropes binding the officer's arms. They were thick, coarse, and so tight her fingers couldn't even wedge between the knots. She clawed at them anyway, her nails scraping skin, her palms burning, her breath turning to frantic sobs. "Please," she begged, though she wasn't sure who she was pleading with, the ropes, the officer, or whatever higher power might be listening. "Please wake up. Please don't die." When the ropes refused to budge, panic swallowed her whole. She turned to the K9 South, pressing a trembling hand against each of their chests. Their hearts were beating, but slow, dangerously slow. She lifted their heads gently, whispering, "Stay awake. Please stay awake." But they didn't respond. Their tongues were too dry, their bodies too hot. She pressed the back of her hand to their fur and flinched, burning. They were cooking alive. Riley looked around desperately. There was no shade, no buildings, no people, nothing but heat shimmering across the endless road. She felt small, helpless, powerless. Her throat tightened as tears blurred her vision. I can't do this," she whispered, gripping her hair with shaking hands. She was 12, just a kid alone, dehydrated, terrified. She didn't have the strength to untie an adult officer or carry 2 dying dogs. But then she looked at them again, 3 lives on the edge of death, and something inside her snapped. She had to try no matter what, or they wouldn't survive. Riley staggered back from the officer, her lungs burning as she fought to catch her breath. The sun felt even hotter now, like it was leaning closer, pressing its fire directly onto her skin. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, but it simply returned, dripping down her face and stinging her eyes. The air shimmered. The asphalt glowed. Even standing still was painful. But then she heard it, a soft, choking whimper from one of the K9s. She spun toward them. The first dog's breathing had slowed drastically, his chest rising only every few seconds. The second dog's tongue hung limply, his breaths barely noticeable. And the officer, his head had slumped even further forward, his pulse so faint she could barely feel it when she pressed her fingers to his neck. A cold dread swept over her. If I don't do something now, they'll die. The thought slammed into her like a wave. Riley's gaze darted around in desperation, searching for anything that could help. But the road stretched endlessly in both directions, empty and deadly. The closest building was a mile away. No cars, no people, no shade. The world felt abandoned, as if she and the 3 dying bodies were the last living things on Earth. Her throat tightened. She swallowed painfully. She looked at the officer again, his skin red and blistering, his wrists torn from the ropes. He didn't have long. The K9 South didn't either. Her heart hammered in her chest. I need to cool them down. Now. The water. She lifted her bottle. It was warm, almost hot, but it was all she had. She hesitated only a second before kneeling beside the first K9 and pouring a small amount on his paws and chest. He flinched, a tiny movement, but enough to make her gasp with hope. She moved to the second dog, doing the same. The water was gone. Every drop spent. Her hands trembled as she looked back at the officer. His lips were cracking. His breathing was shallow. Time wasn't just running out. It was almost gone. Riley took a deep breath, her voice shaken as she whispered to herself, "It's up to me now." Riley wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, forcing herself to breathe, forcing her shaking legs to stand. The heat clawed at her skin, the ground burning through her thin soles, but she pushed through the pain. She looked at the officer again, his head slumped, his wrists bleeding from the ropes, and something fierce sparked inside her. She might have been small, hungry, barefoot, and alone. But she was not helpless. Not today. Not while 3 lives depended on her. She grabbed the rope with both hands and pulled with every ounce of strength she had. Her fingers burned instantly, the coarse fibers scraping her skin raw. She gritted her teeth and tried again, digging her heels into the blistering pavement. Nothing budged. "Come on, come on," she cried, tugging until her arms shook violently. Still nothing. Riley stepped back, panting. Her eyes darted to the broken glass glittering on the side of the road. Without thinking, she ran toward it, scooping up the largest shard she could find. It sliced into her palm, but she didn't stop. She rushed back to the officer, pressing the glass against the thick rope. It scraped and frayed, but progress was painfully slow. Sweat poured down her face. Her hands slipped. Her skin stung. She kept cutting. Minutes passed, each one an eternity, until the glass snapped in half with a sharp crack. Riley gasped, staring at the useless piece in her hand. Panic surged again, but she refused to give in. She dropped to her knees and dug through the gravel, searching desperately. A rock, flat, heavy, sharp-edged, caught her eye. She seized it and attacked the rope again, pounding and twisting until threads finally began to split. A small tear appeared. Her heart leaped. She struck again. And again. And again. The rope loosened just enough for the officer's arm to twitch free an inch. Riley cried out, not in fear, but in fierce determination. Was cutting him loose, even if her hands bled, even if the sun burned, even if she had to fight alone. Because giving up was not an option. Not while they were still alive. Riley's arms trembled violently from exhaustion, her breath burning as she knelt between the officer and the two motionless K9 South. She wiped the sweat from her eyes, her vision swimming from heat and panic. She had managed to loosen part of the rope, but not enough. Not fast enough. And the dogs, oh God, the dogs looked like they were slipping away with every passing second. She crawled toward the closest one, her knees screaming from the blistering pavement. "Hey! Hey, buddy," she whispered shakily, cupping the dog's face with both hands. His fur was scorching hot, his eyes half closed, unfocused. She gently poured the last drops of water she'd saved onto his tongue earlier, hoping some of it had helped. Her own lips were cracking with thirst, but she didn't care. "Come on, don't quit. Please don't quit." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, barely more than a twitch, the dog's paw shifted. Riley's breath hitched. She leaned closer, placing her hand on his chest. His heartbeat, once faint and erratic, thumped a little stronger beneath her palm. "That's it," she whispered, her voice breaking into a trembling smile. "You're still fighting." The dog's ears flickered weakly. His eyes opened just a sliver, focusing on her face. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Riley feel a surge of hope strong enough to drown out the heat and pain. She moved to the second K9, repeating the same gentle touches, the same whispered encouragements. His breathing remained shallow but steady. Her heart soared. Both dogs were still alive, but as their eyes fluttered open, even slightly, they weren't looking at her, they were looking past her toward the officer. And Riley realized something terrifying. The K9 South were trying to rise. Because their handler was slipping away, Riley spun toward the officer. The moment she realized the K9 South were struggling to rise, their weak growls, barely more than strained breaths, vibrated with desperation, not aggression. They weren't reacting to danger. They were reacting to him. Riley dropped the rock and scrambled to the officer's side, her hands slipping on the hot pavement as she pressed, trembling fingers to the side of his neck. Nothing. Then just when panic surged through her, she felt it. A faint pulse, slow, uneven. "But there, sir," she whispered, leaning closer. "Can you hear me, please? Please wake up." For a long moment, there was no response. Just the oppressive silence of the blistering road and the labored breathing of the K9 South. Then the officer's fingers twitched. His head shifted slightly. His eyelids fluttered like someone trapped between dreams and consciousness. Riley gasped and leaned even closer, her heart pounding wildly. His lips parted, dry and cracked. A faint rasp escaped. Riley bent down until her ear was inches from his mouth. "Run!" The word was barely audible. She shook her head instantly. "No, I'm not leaving you. You need water, shade, something. I can help you, I promise." His eyes opened a sliver, glazed with pain and heat stroke. He struggled to form another word, breathing harshly between syllables. "Danger, coming." Riley froze. Her entire body stiffened as the meaning sank in. Someone had tied him here. Someone had left him and the dogs to die. Someone who might return. The officer tried to lift his head, but it fell forward again. The effort drained him completely. He rasped one more shaky breath. "Hide!" Riley's chest tightened. She looked around the empty road, the scorching sun, the endless horizon. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to run. Nowhere safe. But the officer's eyes, weak, unfocused, held a plea she couldn't ignore. He wasn't warning her for himself. He was warning her for her own life. Riley swallowed hard, fear crawling up her throat like ice despite the burning heat. She squeezed his arm gently. "I won't leave you," she whispered, even if danger was already on its way. The road had been silent for so long that the sudden sound felt unreal, a low, distant rumble vibrating through the scorching air. Riley's head snapped up. The K9s south, weak as they were, lifted their ears, their bodies tensing with a fear so instinctive it made Riley's skin crawl. She held her breath and listened harder. Another rumble, growing louder, closer. Then she saw it, a dust cloud rising on the horizon. A truck, large, dented, sun-bleached, and moving fast, barreling toward them. Her heart stopped. "They're coming back." Riley scrambled to her feet, dizzy from the heat. The officer's warning echoed in her mind. "Danger. Coming. Hide." But hide where? The road was empty in every direction. No bushes, no abandoned cars. No shade. Nothing. The truck roared closer, its engine growling like something hungry. Riley grabbed the officer's arm, shaking him desperately. "Please wake up, please," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. But he didn't move. The K9 South tried to rise, their paws slipping on the burning asphalt, but their bodies were too weak. One of them let out a soft, warning growl, more instinct than strength. Riley's pulse hammered in her ears. She looked around frantically. Then she spotted it, a shallow ditch on the side of the road, barely 3 feet deep, just enough to disappear for a moment. It wasn't much, but it was something. She sprinted toward it, motioning to the dogs. "Come on," she hissed, praying they understood. Miraculously, one K9 dragged himself forward, collapsing halfway into the ditch. The other followed slowly, trembling violently. Riley slid in beside them, pressing her body flat against the dirt. Heat radiated upward like fire, but she didn't move. The truck screeched to a stop. 2 men jumped out, their boots hitting the ground hard. Riley swallowed a gasp. Their voices were harsh, angry. "Check if he's done. If not, we finish it." Her blood froze. The men walked toward the pole, toward the officer. Riley clamped a hand over her mouth, shaking uncontrollably. The K9 beside her whimpered softly, and she gently pressed his head down. Footsteps approached, slow, heavy. The men were only feet away now. Riley didn't breathe, didn't blink. In that moment, hiding in the blistering dirt with 2 dying dogs, she realized one terrifying truth: if they found her, she wouldn't survive either. Riley pressed herself deeper into the scorching dirt, her heart hammering so violently she thought the men might hear it. The ditch offered almost no protection. The sun still burned her skin, and the ground felt like a stove beneath her, but it was the only thing keeping her invisible. She peeked over the edge just enough to see the men standing over the officer. One nudged the officer's leg with his boot. "He's still breathing," the man muttered. "Barely." The second man cursed under his breath. We should have stayed until they were all gone. That girl lead cops straight to us if she makes it. Girl? Rayleigh's breath caught. There was a girl watching earlier, the man continued. She ran off when we grabbed the mutts. Rayleigh's stomach twisted. They already knew someone had seen them. One of the K9s beside her let out a weak growl, his ears flattening. Riley placed a trembling hand on his muzzle, whispering a shaky, "Please, quiet. Please." The dog stilled, but the fear in his eyes mirrored her own. The men inspected the scene, complaining about the heat, about how long it was taking. Riley knew they would eventually look around and the ditch wouldn't hide her forever. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't outrun them. She had nothing but rocks, gravel, and her own fragile courage. Then an idea, dangerous, reckless, terrifying, sparked in her mind. She grabbed a handful of stones, her fingers burning as she clutched them. With her other hand, she shook the weak K9 gently. "I need you to trust me. I need you to help," she whispered. The dog's chest rose and fell slowly, but when Riley pointed toward the opposite end of the ditch, his eyes flicked in understanding. She threw the first stone. It struck a metal road sign. Nearby with a loud clang, both men jolted and spun around. What was that? Riley threw another, this time farther toward an abandoned shed behind a row of overgrown weeds. The rock hit the rusted metal siding with a sharp echo. "There!" One man yelled. "Someone's hiding!" They sprinted toward the noise. Riley wasted no time. She crawled out of the ditch, ignoring the burning pavement searing her knees. "Come on, boy," she whispered urgently. She supported the first K9 under his chest, helping him stagger forward. The second dog followed, trembling but determined. Riley's arms trembled violently as she dragged the officer inch by inch toward the ditch. His weight was too much for her small frame, but adrenaline pushed her farther than strength ever could. The heat scorched her back, her palms tore open from the rough ropes, and her vision blurred from exhaustion, but she kept going. The K9 South, still wobbling on unsteady legs, did their best to help. One leaned his body against the officer's side, nudging him forward with weak determination. The other staggered close behind, growling faintly as if guarding them even while dying. Then, voices, not the kidnappers, different voices, urgent, sharp, commanding. Riley froze from beyond the shimmering heat haze. Dust rose again, another vehicle approaching, but this one slower, controlled. She blinked hard, terrified it was the men returning. But the sound was different, clearer, familiar. Sirens. Her heart nearly exploded. A patrol SUV tore onto the road, lights flashing silently. Emergency mode. The kidnappers must have heard it too. Riley saw them sprinting toward their truck in the distance, shouting at each other before speeding away in a cloud of dust. Moments later, the police SUV screeched to a halt. Two officers jumped out, guns drawn, scanning the surroundings. One spotted Riley, this tiny barefoot girl dragging an unconscious officer, flanked by two barely breathing K9 South, and his expression shattered into shock. "Officer down. 2 K9s down." He shouted into his radio. "Request immediate medical backup, multiple victims, extreme heat exposure." Riley collapsed to her knees, chest heaving. They were tied. They were dying. She gasped, her voice cracking. One officer knelt beside her, gently guiding her away from the scorching pavement. She tried to point back to the officer. "Help him, please." "We've got him," he assured her, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Another officer rushed to the K9 South, pouring water on their paws and necks, calling out updates as he checked their pulses. "They're alive, weak but alive." More vehicles arrived, ambulances, animal rescue units, additional squad cars. The scene exploded into controlled chaos as paramedics swarmed in, lifting the officer onto a stretcher, placing IVs, cooling packs, oxygen masks. K9 medics wrapped the dogs in emergency cooling blankets, whispering, "Hang in there, boys. Stay with us." Through the blinding chaos, one paramedic looked back at Riley, sweaty, bruised, dehydrated, trembling, and asked softly, "Are you the one who found them?" Riley nodded weakly. The paramedic's voice cracked. "You saved their lives." The moment she heard the paramedic's words, "You saved their lives," Riley felt something inside her finally let go. Her breath shook as relief washed over her, but her body, pushed far beyond its limits, could no longer keep up. The world around her wavered like liquid glass, the edges of her vision dimming as if someone were slowly turning down the sun. She tried to respond, to say she was fine, to tell them to focus on the officer and the dogs. But the words tangled in her throat. Her lips felt numb. Her legs trembled violently beneath her. A strange ringing filled her ears, steady, disorienting, drowning out the frantic voices around her. Hey, kid, stay with me." An officer yelled, suddenly kneeling at her side. Riley blinked slowly, her eyelids heavy. I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible. She wasn't okay. Her skin was burning, her heartbeat racing out of rhythm. She had been under the 140 degrees Fahrenheit sun too long. Way too long. As the paramedics rushed toward her, she tried to push herself upright. Her hand slipped on the pavement. Her knees buckled. The officer caught her just before her head hit the ground. "She's overheating, severe heat exhaustion." One paramedic shouted, "Get her cooled now." Strong arms lifted her gently, laying her on a stretcher. Cold packs were pressed to her head, her neck, her ribs. Someone placed a damp cloth over her face. She gasped at the sensation, the first cool thing she'd felt all day. It made her dizzy with relief. Through the fading haze, she turned her head toward the officer being wheeled into the ambulance. His hand hung limp over the edge of the stretcher. But one of the K9 South, wrapped in cooling blankets, nudged it weakly. "They were alive." "Good," Riley whispered, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Her vision blurred completely. The world grew quiet. And in the arms of the paramedics trying desperately to save her. The brave homeless girl who refused to walk away finally slipped into unconsciousness. The first thing Riley felt was cold, soft, gentle cold pressing against her forehead. It was such a shock after endless hours of blistering heat that she jolted slightly, her breath catching in her throat. Then came the sounds, steady beeping, quiet voices, the low hum of air conditioning. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the bright hospital lights above her. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. She didn't know if the officer made it. She didn't know if the K9 South were alive. Then she heard it, a soft whine. Her heart jumped. Riley turned her head, every muscle aching, and froze. 2 German shepherds lay on the floor beside her bed, wrapped in fresh bandages, 4 lines attached, their chests rising steadily. Their eyes were tired, but when they saw her move, their tails thumped softly against the tiles. She gasped. You're okay?" One of the dogs lifted his head weakly and nudged her hand. Tears filled her eyes instantly. A moment later, the door opened, and a familiar man walked in, pale, bruised but conscious. The officer. He steadied himself on a crutch and offered a shaky smile. "You're awake," he said softly. Riley swallowed hard. Did you all make it?" He nodded, emotion tightening his voice. "Because of you. The medic said if you hadn't acted when you did, none of us would be here." Riley looked down, overwhelmed. No one had ever said words like that to her. No one had ever thanked her for anything. The officer stepped closer. "Riley, you didn't just save 3 lives." He paused, eyes softening. "You changed them." The K9 South nudged her again, as if agreeing. For the first time in her life, Riley felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt seen, Over the next few days, Rayleigh became the talk of the entire police department. Officers she had never met stopped by her hospital room just to thank her, some with tears in their eyes, others with hands pressed over their hearts. They brought snacks, blankets, and even a small stuffed German shepherd that one of the K9 handlers insisted she keep. Riley didn't know how to react to all the kindness. She wasn't used to people noticing her, let alone treating her like someone important. On the third morning, the officer she had saved, now wearing a fresh bandage around his head and supported by a cane, entered her room with a group of officials. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions serious yet warm. Rayleigh's stomach knotted. Did she do something wrong? The officer smiled gently. Riley, we've been talking, and we want to give you something no one else ever has. She blinked, confused. What? The police chief stepped forward.